All right, y'all. I am pushing forward. I am a little exhausted today. This is a big freaking video. I am very excited to do it. So hopefully my energy levels and my voice doesn't give out. So before we get into this, I need to ground what this is and what you're stepping into. My name is Heather, and this channel is Underwater Panther. And what I'm building here is a structural framework, a system that maps how identity organizes, how the nervous system sequences under pressure, how masculine and feminine functions as mechanics, and how different archetypes carry or discharge moral weight. Because people don't just act differently, they organize differently. This work brings together astrology, cognitive functions, and polarity mechanics, not as separate ideas, but as one system. This is not about surface level traits or labels, this is about sequence. So I am going to go ahead and bring up the first archetype so that you can familiarize yourself with what I'm talking about. So this is not about surface level traits or labels. This is about sequence. What activates first, what gets delayed, what compensates, and what eventually breaks. Everything here runs on one principle: sequence determines behavior, because whatever activates first in a system will shape everything that follows. So, on this channel, we break down all 12 archetypes through inner versus outer, masculine and feminine quadrants, distortion order, how development actually happens under pressure, and moral load, who retains consequence versus who releases it. So, what you're looking at is an astro-psychological key card. This is the ego, the foundation of this personality type, archetype, whatever you want to call it. I combine astrology with psychology, as well as inner and outer masculine and feminine containment within the personality's nervous system. So there is a lot going on here. I've been working on these topics for over a decade now. So I'm getting pretty advanced in my system, and it is the most exciting thing almost on this planet to myself. All right. So, because once you can see that structure, behavior stops being confusing. It becomes readable. So, welcome into my Aquarian or INTJ mind. I have my Mercury is in Aquarius in the 11th house. I'm an Aries rising, 85% Capricorn or ISTJ, stellium, moon, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, midheaven. Yes, so and I do have very big Pisces placements or INFJ, but I don't like to admit that hardly. So that is Venus. My Venus is certainly Pisces. I will let you know that. So this is Underwater Panther. If you're if you're here, you're not here to memorize labels. You're here to understand why people move the way they do, why certain patterns repeat, and why some systems carry weight while others move it. We don't stay at the surface, we map what's underneath. All right, so the prior video, I had to do some corrections on who was it? Scorpio, Capricorn, Virgo, Taurus, and Leo. So I have been wrestling with my moral cognitive series for the last month now. I did an overall ranking of the most masculine through the most feminine. Overall, I did a ranking on that. And then now we have moved on to the moral load bearing ranking throughout the 12 archetypes. So I do still have 3 archetypes to go. I am almost done. I already have those mapped out. I do just need to film them. So, yeah, it's an amazing upgrade. I have updated all of my key cards the first time in a long time. I created these 8 or 9 years ago. So now they do include the inner and outer masculine and feminine quadrants, as well as the distortion order on the key cards. So now that the corrections are in place, now that the key cards are aligned, and now that the architecture underneath the system is finally locked, we can move through all 12 archetypes cleanly. So this is a bridge video. I do want to I've been wanting to do this video. I was going to wait until I got all the way to the end, but I think it's imperative to do it now, and then I will finish the Sagittarius, Aquarius, and Gemini in my Moral Load series. And then I'm also working on a 700-page or so ebook. Probably take me a month, and during that time, I will be doing archetypal dynamics. And I'm excited for the next series, but I definitely need to finish my 700-page book. That is, this whole series has been the most intimidating, honestly. It's taken a heck of a lot of work. Each video that I create that's like an hour long takes well over 5 hours of work behind it. So anyway, so now the architecture underneath the system is finally locked. We can move through all 12 archetypes cleanly. And this matters because this is the point where the system stops feeling like scattered observations and starts functioning like a real map. We are not just looking at traits. We are not just saying who is emotional, who is logical, who is masculine, who is feminine, who carries more load or who carries less. We are looking at sequence. We are looking at how the nervous system organizes itself under pressure. We are looking at what starts first, what comes second, what gets delayed, what gets overdeveloped, and what gets pushed to the end. And for each archetype, I am grounding 4 things together: their overall masculine versus feminine orientation, their moral load position, their distortion order, and their quadrant structure. Because once those 4 things are seen together, the archetype stops being flat and starts becoming predictive. So we're going to move through all 12 archetypes. For each, we're going to talk about the masculine versus feminine overall orientation, moral load position, distortion order, and inner and outer masculine and feminine quadrant structure. So what you are looking at, I don't think I finished myself. It's an astro-psychological. I combine astrology and psychology. Astrologically, for an archetype, you have the ruler, exaltation, left field, and fall for the planetary imprints. Psychologically, you have the hero, parent, child, and inferior cognitive functions. And then we also have the inner and outer masculine and feminine quadrants within the archetype's nervous system. And we are talking about the distortion order, which means how do they develop throughout their life in an unintegrated way. So each archetype has a pattern. All right, so we are going to start with Aries. And I actually need to get back to, I have a master key. Eventually, all of this information will be in a book available for purchase. I've written over 30 books so far, and I plan on writing at least 30 more. So this is a lifelong journey for myself. All right, where's the key card? There it is. All right, so I'm going to keep the inner and outer masculine and feminine key card up there, as well as the what do you call it? Astro-Psychological key card. I'm getting exhausted. All right, so we're going to start with Aries. All right, so Aries begins with action. I'm so close to the screen. I just can't see anymore. Exhausted. All right, so Aries begins with action. Aries does not wait for clarity in order to move. Movement is what creates clarity. This is the first thing people have to understand. Aries is one of the most masculine archetypes overall because it is built around outer force, immediate engagement, and direct contact with reality. So Aries is actually number 2 overall masculine. All right, I lost my place. All right, so where was I? So it is not built to sit still and process for long periods of time before doing something. It is built to generate momentum, test boundaries through collision, and learn through immediate consequence. So its distortion order is outer masculine first. I need to move my own key card over. So the outer masculine is extroverted sensing, SE hero, and Mars ruler. Then inner masculine with introverted thinking, TI parent, and sun in exaltation. Then inner masculine. Oh, wait, hold on. Where was I? Sorry. And then outer feminine, excuse me. It's on the key card. Outer feminine with extroverted feeling child and Venus in left field, and then inner feminine with introverted intuition inferior and Saturn in fall. So that's act, analyze, engage, and reflect. Aries moves first because the nervous system experiences motion as regulation. Then it begins to build internal logic around what just happened. Then it starts engaging the social and relational environment through feedback, reaction, friction, and emotional exchange. And only later does reflection come online. Only later does Aries slow down enough to ask what this means long term, where this is going, or what deeper pattern has been repeating underneath the action. This is why Aries is high masculine overall, but only mid-range in moral load. They are actually tier 4, which is the lowest tier. I can't remember the exact number, and I'm not going to. Yeah, actually, I'm being silly because I keep forgetting that I can actually use my phone to help me. I have the same notes on my phone as I do my computer. All right, so Aries is number 2 masculine, and in the moral load, they are, I gotta get to it. I just can't. Oh, it's number 7 in the moral load ranking order. All right, so they're in between Pisces and Leo. So Capricorn, Scorpio, tier 1, Cancer, Virgo, tier 2, Taurus, Pisces, tier 3. Tier 4 moral load bearers are Aries, Leo, Libra, Sagittarius, Aquarius, and Gemini. So I did videos on Aries, Leo, and Libra already. I have probably 3.5 hours done on Aries. So if you are interested in listening to Aries more in depth, you can find that in my Aries playlist or on my moral cognitive playlist. All right, so Aries feels responsible to do something. Aries does not naturally feel responsible to carry the afterweight forever. It discharges tension through action. It is not conscience. It is not a conscience retention. It is motion-based responsibility. All right, so yeah, I think that was a good overall encompassing for Aries. So now we are going to move on to Taurus, which I'm shifting through notes. Where is Taurus? Pisces. There it is. I forgot what the symbol was for Taurus. That's hilarious. Duh, cow. All right. So let me bring up Taurus on the screen here. Take down Aries. Taurus. All right. All right, so Taurus begins with freeze. So Taurus is number 5 moral load bearer. I need to get these two lists together. And then number 9 on the masculine to feminine sequence, meaning they are in the lowest tier, 5th tier, and they are more feminine along with Libra, Cancer, and Pisces. So Taurus begins with freeze, not because Taurus lacks strength and not because Taurus lacks will, but because Taurus first meets reality through the body. Taurus is feminine heavy overall because its first loyalty is not to speed, not to abstraction, not to force, but to stabilization. Taurus wants to reduce distortion before it does anything, or disruption. Taurus wants to reduce disruption before it does anything else. So the distortion order is inner feminine with SI parent and moon, and then outer masculine with TE and Venus and Earth, inner masculine with FI inferior and Uranus. I actually need to write that in there. I don't know why it's not Uranus. So inner masculine is introverted feeling inferior in Uranus, and outer feminine is extroverted intuition child, Mars, and Pluto. All right, so Taurus wants to reduce disruption before it does anything else. So it freezes. Taurus begins with somatic safety tracking. It reads the environment through tension, comfort, familiarity, repetition, and bodily continuity. So that's SI parent with moon, the somatic memory, nervous system storage, embodied safety tracking, where Taurus learns the world through the body first. This is dorsal, vagal, freeze, and earth form. Safety becomes sameness, they stay. So then we move into controlling or stabilizing the external environment so that disruption is minimized and predictability is restored. So that is done with the outer masculine, extroverted thinking, Venus and Earth. In the ruling, so Earth and Venus is in the ruling position, astrologically, extroverted thinking hero. All right, I'm actually going to write that in there too. So TE hero and Venus and Earth, the outer masculine, represents environmental structuring, comfort control, and material stabilization, where Taurus organizes reality around pleasure, stability, and predictability. Once the body stabilizes, Taurus begins shaping the environment. This is Taurus's passive extraction shadow. When activated under pressure, this becomes decisive and final. So after that, much later than people assume, Taurus begins to form a deeper private relationship to value, truth, and internal meaning. That part is slower, quieter, and often delayed until years of tolerance has built up enough pressure to force it into consciousness. So that is talking about the inner masculine with introverted feeling or FI inferior and Uranus. So this is delayed values, private meaning, internal truth awakening, where Taurus finally begins asking what actually matters. FI is buried deep in Taurus. It doesn't develop early. It wakes up after years of tolerating too much. Truth forces movement. And then finally, at the end, Taurus acts. But when Taurus acts, it is rarely exploratory. It is rarely chaotic. It is usually the result of a long, invisible accumulation. This is why Taurus sits in that conditional middle zone of moral load. So they are in a tier with Pisces. Tier 3, which is more relational. They go both ways. They don't naturally carry moral load, but they can. They don't at first, but they can after they become more conscious to what is going on. So Taurus can carry a lot. Taurus can endure a lot. Taurus can absorb a lot, but that absorption does not automatically become moral enforcement. It becomes continuity first. So they do not enforce consequence upon others. All right, so that is done. The last portion of this is the outer feminine with extroverted intuition child, Mars and Pluto. So that is not actually a forceful, consequential forcing that onto other people. All right, so it represents suppressed alternatives, change awareness, and rupture potential, where Taurus finally moves and everyone is confused. So NE imagines alternatives, Mars initiates movement, but Taurus suppresses this quadrant also for years. They've been metabolizing in silence, which is why Taurus explosions surprises people. So they can become the bull in the china shop. So stability first, survival first. So Taurus is not low load, but it is not a primary retainer in the same way Capricorn or Scorpio is in the moral load ranking system. Taurus is a conditional carrier whose burden collects silently until action becomes unavoidable. All right, so now we're going to move on to Gemini. Where is Gemini? There you are. Oh, I thought I took Taurus down. All right, Gemini, let's blow that up so you can see it better. And get to Gemini on here, which is all the way at the bottom. All right, so Gemini. Gemini begins with engagement. I don't know why I need to move my notes over so I can read them. All right, so Gemini, or the ENTJ, begins with engagement. Gemini does not begin by stabilizing internally, and it does not begin by anchoring into fixed identity. It begins by moving outward into information, language, organization, communication, and active external processing. This is why Gemini appears masculine leaning externally, even though internally it can be much less stable than it first looks. All right, so Gemini is number 8 on the masculine to feminine sequence, and that is the personality. Aries, Gemini, and Libra are the archetypes that will trigger the psychological people the most, and that's totally fine. So Gemini is number 8 on my masculine to feminine ranking because they are very androgynous. I will be getting into Gemini later. All right. So the distortion order is engage, pattern, explore, value. So that's the outer masculine, TE hero and Mercury, inner feminine, NI parent and North node in exaltation. Outer feminine, SE child and Jupiter in left field, and then inner masculine with FI inferior and the south node. So I do with Gemini and Sagittarius, I add North node, south node. If you look, you cannot find a planet astrologically in the exaltation or the fall. I have studied deeply, deeply into this, and I do add North and South nodes to Gemini and Sagittarius, which that'll be a whole video in itself. All right, so Gemini first organizes reality through speech, categorization, movement of information, and active response to what is happening in real time. So that is with their outer masculine, extroverted thinking, TE hero, and Mercury ruling Gemini. So this quadrant represents execution and communication and environmental organization. Gemini engages reality through active external processing, organizes information while speaking, structures conversations in real time, drives movement through communication over processing instead of deciding. All right, so then beneath that, it begins tracking patterns internally. So that is with their inner feminine and I parent and north node. So this quadrant represents internal patterning and trajectory awareness. This is Gemini's hidden layer, tracking direction beneath movement. They see where things are going, understands pattern flow, processes trajectory internally. Over patterning can lead to hesitation. Reading too far ahead, pausing due to multiple outcomes. So then it moves back outward into exploration, experience, and experimentation. So that is done with their outer feminine, extroverted sensing, SE child, and Jupiter in left field. This quadrant represents experimental engagement, expansion through action. Gemini tests reality through experience and movement. Tries things, explores environments, engages physically and socially. Scattered expansion, impulsive movement, and lack of follow through or overstimulation. All right, so and only later does it form a deep internal anchor around value, identity, or stable moral position. So Gemini is the last number 12 on my moral load bearing ranking system. So this is why Gemini is low in moral load retention. Gemini is not built to keep moral residue in the body over long stretches of time. Gemini reframes, they contextualize, they shift perspective, and they keep information moving. That does not mean Gemini has no ethics. It means Gemini experiences morality situationally and cognitively rather than as retained existential weight. Gemini stabilizes through movement between ideas, not through burden retention. This is why Gemini often looks adaptable, quick, and mentally alive, but under pressure may struggle with stable identity, consistent value anchoring, or carrying consequence the way higher load archetypes do. So Gemini begins with exploration, moving mentally before grounding physically. All right, so now we are going to get into Cancer. Okay, so Cancer. Cancer begins with care. Cancer does not begin with independence, abstract logic, or detached pattern recognition. It begins with the relational field. It begins by reading people, tracking emotional atmosphere, sensing attachment, and moving towards care, cohesion, and protection. This is why Cancer is feminine, heavy overall, and high in moral load. All right, so masculine and feminine ranking, Cancer is number 11, so they are very feminine. And then in my moral ranking, they are number 3 most moral load bearing archetypes. So they are number 3, very high moral load bearer. They're in the same tier with Virgo. So tier 1 is Capricorn, Scorpio through structure. Tier 2 is Cancer and Virgo relationally. So Cancer's distortion order is outer feminine, inner masculine, outer masculine. So it's care, absorb, guide, and defend. Cancer first tries to hold connection. So the connection is the outer feminine, extroverted feeling or FE hero, and moon ruling. This quadrant represents emotional attunement and relational atmosphere sensing and awareness. Protective bonding, where Cancer feels the emotional field first, absorbs collective mood, and instinctively moves towards care, cohesion, and safety. They hold connection. Then it absorbs emotional history and attachment memory into the nervous system itself. The body remembers, the heart remembers. The atmosphere gets stored. So this is with the inner feminine, extroverted sensing, SE child, and Saturn. Saturn in left field. So this quadrant represents embodied attachment memory, nervous system storage, and loyalty through lived experience, where safety becomes physical, responsibility settles into the body, and past connection imprints shape present behavior. Stored loyalty in the body and carries emotional history somatically. Only after that does Cancer begin forming a quieter internal structure around meaning, trajectory, guidance, and long term emotional direction. So that is with inner masculine, introverted intuition parents, and Jupiter in exaltation. So this quadrant represents future vision, quiet guidance, and meaning architecture, as well as relational trajectory, where Cancer privately tracks relational trajectories, anticipates emotional outcomes, and orients toward long term belonging and purpose. So they track long term outcomes quietly. They hope systems will change. And then finally, last, Cancer defends. Cancer enforces boundaries late. Cancer uses force late. Cancer protects actively only after much has already been absorbed. This is why Cancer becomes one of the higher moral load archetypes. So the last is the last quadrant in the distortion order is outer masculine with introverted thinking, TI inferior, and Mars in fall. So that quadrant represents reactive logic, protective action, and boundary enforcement under threat, where Cancer shifts from nurturing to defending, using forceful clarity to stop harm and protect attachment. Boundaries come last, defend only after they are completely depleted. So Cancer carries the human burden. Cancer retains fallout. Cancer feels implicated by emotional rupture, abandonment, and relational harm, even when it is not solely responsible. This is not structural load in the Capricorn sense. It is relational load, emotional infrastructure, human consequence. So when Cancer breaks, it often breaks after long-term overcarrying of what other people felt, needed, or failed to hold themselves. So Cancer begins with care, forming attachment first, then absorbing, then guiding, and then defending. All right, so now we're moving on to Leo. All right, so Leo begins with expression. Leo does not define itself internally first and then move outward once its identity is complete. Leo becomes itself through expression, through visibility, through contact with the world, through performance, radiance, projection, charisma, creativity, and embodied self display. So this is why Leo is masculine in expression, even though deeper inside it has a powerful internal identity axis that develops later. So Leo is number 8 on my moral load. So they are in tier 4. They are more of a movement nervous system. They don't retain moral load in their nervous system. They want to move it, and they are number 4 masculine on my masculine to feminine ranking order. So Leo's distortion order. All right, so Leo's distortion order is outer masculine, SE hero and sun, outer feminine, TE child, Saturn and Uranus, inner masculine with FI parent and Pluto, and then inner feminine with NI inferior and Neptune and Mercury. All right, so they express, perform, define, and then reflect. All right, so Leo first comes outward through presence. So that would be with the outer masculine, SE hero, and sun ruler. This quadrant represents presence, projection, identity radiance, and environmental engagement through charisma. Interacts with reality through visible identity. They occupy the environment through presence. Energy moves outward as confidence, humor, creativity, leadership, storytelling, performance, or expressive personality. Then Leo organizes the external environment around that presence through playful leadership, execution, influence, and performative structure. So that is with their outer feminine, with TE or extroverted thinking child, Saturn, and Uranus in left field. This quadrant represents expressive leadership, playful execution, and creative command of systems. This quadrant organizes the external world around Leo identity. TE child experiments with leadership, performance, and organization. Saturn introduces structure and responsibility. Uranus introduces creative originality. Leo often naturally mobilizes people through enthusiasm and inspiration. Then, underneath all of that, it begins asking the deeper question: who am I really beneath what I project? So, this is where the inner masculine comes in, and this is where Leo becomes far more serious than people often realize. So, the inner masculine is introverted feeling or FI parent, and Pluto in exaltation. Identity. So, this quadrant, I need a different song. All right, so the inner masculine quadrant represents identity integrity, emotional sovereignty, deep self definition. Leo develops a strong internal value system with FI that asks, who am I really? FI forms the emotional care of the identity. Pluto in exaltation intensifies transformation. Leo often experiences periods of identity death and rebirth across life. Healthy Leo learns the difference between true identity and performance identity. Only later does reflection come online in a deeper, symbolic, long range way. So, Leo is relatively masculine overall, but not a higher moral load retainer. So, the last quadrant is inner feminine, which is the reflection awareness last quadrant with an I inferior, Neptune, and Mercury. So this quadrant represents symbolic foresight, long-term meaning perception, and identity trajectory awareness. And I ask deeper questions. Where is this identity going? What patterns repeat across time? Neptune introduces imagination, but also illusion. Mercury in fall slows internal reflection. The performer becomes the symbolic leader. So Leo carries morality more through identity and honor than through long-term consequence storage. Leo asks, what does this say about who I am? What image am I living? What version of self am I inhabiting? So when Leo breaks under pressure, it often happens through self-image fracture, shame, performative overcompensation, or the collapse between projected identity and real internal definition. So Leo begins with expression, becoming visible before defining itself. All right, so now moving on to Virgo. All right, so Virgo is number 6, most masculine to feminine. So Virgo is in a tier with Scorpio, tier 3. So Virgo and Scorpio, they are like outwardly feminine and internally masculine. To me, Virgos come off very feminine. If you look at their key card, you've got outer feminine and then inner feminine. So to me, they are pretty feminine. It's interesting how Virgo and Scorpio work with the overall masculine and feminine. All right, and then moral load, they are number 4. So they are in tier 2. They are top 4 moral load bearer. They are in a tier with Cancer. So Virgo begins with helping. Virgo does not begin with private meaning. It does not begin with direct aggression. It does not begin with abstract hope. It begins by moving forward what is out of order and trying to correct it. This is why Virgo feels so externally service oriented and why it often presents as feminine first, even though it contains a very sharp corrective edge later in the sequence. All right, so the distortion order is outer feminine, Fe hero and Mercury, then inner feminine, Si parent and Earth, inner masculine, any child, Jupiter and Neptune, and then last outer masculine, Ti inferior and Venus. So they fix or help, then they stabilize or structure, and then they hope and reframe, and then they enforce or exit. All right, so it's distortion order is outer feminine, inner feminine, or structural continuity, inner masculine, and then the hopeful reframing sense, and finally outer masculine enforcement. Help, structure, hope, exit. First, Virgo first scans the environment for what needs maintenance, support, adjusting, fixing, or practical care. So they do this with the outer feminine, Fe hero, and Mercury. So this quadrant represents relational attunement, behavioral calibration, and service-based care. Reads the social environment through usefulness, responsibility, and responsiveness. Instinctively moving towards fixing, organizing, supporting, and improving what's out of alignment. So they notice and fix everything. They try to stabilize chaos. Then Virgo begins building internal continuity around effort, memory, reliability, and integrity tracking. So they do this with the inner feminine, Si parent, and Earth. So this quadrant represents continuity memory, pattern recognition, and responsibility tracking. So privately holding the ledger of effort, reliability, and follow through. Remembering who showed up, who didn't, what worked, and what broke over time. Internalized error, tracking who did what. Carrying integrity. Then Virgo still holds some hope that things can improve, that people can improve, that the system can be fixed, that enough precision and attention can prevent collapse. But eventually, if enough breaches accumulate, Virgo exits. And when Virgo exits, it does not always do it loudly. Virgo often does it cleanly, quietly, and finally. So they do this with the outer masculine, Ti inferior, and Venus in fall. This quadrant represents corrective logic, boundary enforcement, and decisive disengagement. Finally, stops explaining, stops helping, and starts enforcing, cutting access when integrity has been breached too many times. So they disengage quietly, they stop explaining, and leave cleanly. So this is why Virgo is high moral load. Virgo carries integrity burden. Virgo carries correction pressure. Virgo feels responsible for preventing error, reducing collapse, and holding standards that keep systems from deteriorating. So, even though Virgo often looks soft at first, the deeper structure is not softness. It is maintenance under pressure. And the burnout comes when maintenance becomes one sided and no one else is carrying their part. All right, so now we are going to move into Libra. I do need a drink break. All right, so Libra. I'm failing this song. I'm going to rewind it because it's that awesome. All right, so moving on to Libra or the ENTP. So Libra begins with engagement. Libra does not begin with stable inner truth. It does not begin with fixed identity. Libra begins by entering the relational field, moving through interaction, reading dynamics, testing perspectives, and feeling its way through external equilibrium. So Libra is feminine dominant externally, but structurally more complex than people realize because it often appears soft while actually relying on a great deal of movement and mental activity beneath the surface. All right, so Libra is number 9 on my moral load ranking, which I have done videos on Libra already. I can't remember how many hours, a couple hours at least. So if you're interested in deep diving into Libra, I do have that video done. I also have playlists on each of the archetypes. Do check those out if you want to do a deeper dive. All right, so overall, masculine and feminine for Libra, they are number 10 on my masculine to feminine ranking system, which means they are in the final tier of the most feminine archetypes, which are Taurus, Libra, Cancer, and Pisces under pressure. I cannot wait to trigger C.S. Joseph. I'm waiting for it. All right, so anywho, Libra begins with engagement. Okay, so the distortion order, that's where I was. All right, so Libra's distortion order is outer masculine with explore, calibrate with inner masculine, TI parent and Saturn, engage with outer feminine, FE child and Mars, and then stabilize or awareness delayed through internal feminine, inner feminine with SI inferior and Sun in fall. So the distortion order here is outer masculine, inner masculine, outer masculine, or outer feminine, inner feminine, outer masculine, inner masculine, outer feminine, inner feminine. There we go. All right, so Libra explores, defines, relates, and then stabilize. Libra begins by exploring possibility and relational movement. So that is done with the outer masculine, extroverted intuition, any hero in the ruling Venus. So this quadrant represents relational exploration, environmental scanning, dynamic interaction through possibility, engages reality through movement across perspectives. Any scans for patterns, possibilities, alternate viewpoints, and relational dynamics. Venus directs that movement towards harmony, attraction, and equilibrium. This creates conversational intelligence, social adaptability, charm through perception, fluid identity, ability to read and enter any dynamic. They enter the room to read it, feel it, and move within it. Energy moves outward as curiosity, wit, play, and relational engagement. So then Libra begins trying to define and calibrate what makes sense. So they do this with their inner masculine quadrant, TI parent, and Saturn in exaltation. So this quadrant represents internal logic, structural reasoning, and truth formation, independent of others. This is their hidden backbone, builds internal frameworks of truth. TI asks what actually makes sense. Saturn reinforces discipline, consistency, long-term reasoning, and structural integrity. So they stop floating and they begin defining. They refine ideas, test logic, and develop precision thinking beneath their social fluidity. So then Libra moves through social connection, emotional response, and relational balancing, and that is done with the outer feminine. Oh, I see what's happening. So Libra is very long, so I'm going to actually move this so that we can get more of that in screen. All right, so then they move through social connection, emotional response, and relational balancing. This is done with their outer feminine, extroverted feeling, or FE child, and Mars in left field. So this quadrant represents emotional interaction and relational movement in real-time engagement. So engages emotionally through live interaction. FE reads and responds to emotional tone, while Mars adds movement, activation, and relational push. This creates playful social energy, teasing and bantering, emotional responsiveness, and dynamic connection. So they do not want to sit still in relationships. They move through them, test them, adjust within them. Emotion is not avoided, it is explored. So, and only later do Libras develop a strong, stable internal anchor. So, their internal, not very strong at all, identity anchor is the inner feminine with SI inferior and sun in fall. This quadrant represents internal stability, identity grounding, consistency over time, and this is their most difficult layer. SI ask, what is stable? What is consistent? What can I rely on? Sun and fall represents identity, and it is not internally anchored. This creates difficulty defining self without others, weak internal reference point, reliance on relational feedback for identity. Often feeling I understand myself through interaction, not isolation. So this is why Libra is low in moral load retention. Libra does not naturally hold consequence as a private retained burden in the same way Cancer, Virgo, Scorpio, or Capricorn do. Libra wants to restore balance. Once harmony is reestablished, Libra often experiences the cycle as complete. That does not mean truth was fully held. It means equilibrium was restored. So Libra's breakdowns come through over-calibration to others, identity diffusion, too much adjustment, too much relational outsourcing, and a loss of stable internal reference point. So Libra begins with engagement, exploring interaction before defining truth. All right, so now we are going to move on to Scorpio, which is a very high moral load bearer. All right, so I do need to make Scorpio. I need to add more to Scorpio. All right, so Scorpio, from the masculine to the feminine overall ranking, Scorpio is number 7 in tier 3 with Virgo. So they are outernally felt feminine and internally masculine. And then moral ranking, they are the number 2 on the moral ranking order. So Scorpio begins with feeling. This is one of the most important corrections in the entire system because Scorpio does not begin with perception the way it often appears from the outside. Scorpio begins with nervous system threat detection. It begins with feeling at a pre-verbal level, sensing instability, sensing contamination, sensing betrayal, sensing danger. This is why Scorpio has one of the deepest feminine origins in the whole system, while still becoming one of the strongest carriers of hard internal power. So, Scorpio's distortion order is inner feminine with SI inferior and moon and fall. Scorpio is the only archetype in my system that their distortion order begins in the inferior function. So psychologically, normally it's the hero, parent, child, inferior, or normally hero, child, parent, inferior. Scorpio is the only one that starts in the inferior with SI in moon and fall. Yeah. Hardcore like that. So it goes inner feminine, SI inferior, moon and fall, inner masculine with FI parent and Uranus and exaltation, outer masculine with TE child and Venus and earth and left field, and then outer feminine last with any hero, Pluto and Mars ruling. So they feel, harden, strike, and then perceive. Scorpio first feels threat, then it hardens, then it develops internal sovereignty, private law, boundary intensification, and access control. Then it strikes, then it enforces. And only after that does perception open outward in a more active, charged, scanning way. All right, so Scorpio first feels threat with the inner feminine, SI inferior, and moon and fall. This quadrant represents nervous system storage of betrayal, safety calibration. They feel deeply first. They learn the world is dangerous. So I've already done videos on Scorpio, probably 3 hours worth in this series. So do check those out if you're interested. I do have a playlist for Scorpio. All right, so then they harden, and they harden with their inner masculine or FI parent in Uranus in exaltation. This quadrant represents sovereignty, private moral law, access, revocation. They harden fast, develop internal authority early, and this is where they certainly have trust issues. All right, so then after that, Scorpio develops internal sovereignty, private law, boundary intensification, and access control with FI parent, actually. So then it strikes. So the striking is the enforcing, and that is with their outer masculine, TE child, Venus, and Earth in left field. So this quadrant represents consequences, access, reality, enforcement. Truth becomes a weapon. They cut people off, they burn bridges, and they protect through destruction. And only after that does perception open outward in a more active, charged, and scanning way. And this is their outer feminine last with any hero, Pluto, and Mars ruling. Representing perception arrives already charged. This is their threat radar, motive scanning, urgency, inside awareness. They perceive the world through danger, hypervigilance becomes their default. So Scorpio does not let contamination evaporate. So Scorpio is one of the highest moral load archetypes. They do not let contamination evaporate. Scorpio retains it. Scorpio stores betrayal, ethical corruption, hidden rot, and misuse of power at a visceral level. And because of that, Scorpio's perception is never neutral once the process has begun. By the time Scorpio is perceiving outwardly, it is perceiving through a system that has already registered threat and already started fortifying. This is why Scorpio feels final. This is why Scorpio feels absolute. This is why Scorpio can become scorched earth under enough pressure. Scorched earth. Hello, Mars and Pluto feeding into TE child, Earth, and Venus. Hello. You can totally see it. I love these key cards. So, not because it starts in aggression, but because Scorpio starts in retained violation. Scorpio begins with feeling, protecting itself before perceiving clearly. All right, so now we are moving into Sagittarius. All right, so Sagittarius. Sagittarius is number 4, most masculine, but they are number 10 on my moral load ranking tier 4. So they do not retain much moral load. They want to move it out. So Sagittarius begins with analysis. This is crucial because Sagittarius is often mistaken for a purely movement-based archetype, when in reality it begins from an internal masculine position first. Sagittarius does not trust emotion first. It does not trust attachment first. It does not even trust action first. Sagittarius trusts what holds up. It begins by internally testing truth, coherence, and logic. Then it acts to test reality. Then only after experience does deeper realization come. And only later still does emotional or relational connection become central. So Sagittarius's distortion order is inner masculine with TI hero, that is analyze and Jupiter ruling. And then we act with outer masculine, SE parent, South Node, and Chiron. Yes, I know this is wild. Gemini and Sagittarius, I do add a few of the deeper astrological parts. So I will break Gemini and Sagittarius down in depth at some point. All right, so then after that, we have realize with inner feminine, inner child, and Mercury in left field, and then connect last with outer feminine, Fe inferior, Sirius and north node. So they analyze, act, realize, and then connect. Sagittarius is overall highly masculine because it is oriented around truth testing, movement, trajectory, and engagement with reality rather than absorption or emotional containment. But in moral load, it falls into tier 4. Low retention, motion-based discharge. Sagittarius can care very deeply about truth, philosophy, justice, and worldview, but that does not mean it retains moral residue the way higher load archetypes do. Sagittarius converts pain into narrative, meaning, belief, and perspective. It processes through philosophy. It zooms out, it reframes. So Sagittarius may feel conviction intensely, but once the event has been converted into meaning, the burden often lifts. This is why Sagittarius can look morally strong while still being low in long term moral retention. Sagittarius carries doctrine more easily than aftermath. So I am going to be breaking down Sagittarius after this video in depth. Probably will take 2 or 3 hours. So that is as deep as I'm going to go for now. So Sagittarius begins with analysis, testing truth through action before connecting emotionally. All right, moving on to Capricorn. Capricorn, number 1 masculine and number 1 moral load bearer. hurts my Capricorn stellium to say that out loud. No, not really. All right, so Capricorn. All right, number one, masculine, number one, moral load bearer. Capricorn begins with carrying. Capricorn does not begin with care. It does not begin with exploration. Capricorn does not begin with self-expression. It begins with responsibility, with structure, with internalized pressure, with stored consequence. Capricorn is the most masculine archetype overall in this system because its force direction is fundamentally oriented towards contained duty, structure, endurance, and enforcement of reality across time. So Capricorn's distortion order is inner masculine with Carry, SI hero, and Saturn ruler. And then building with the outer masculine, TE parent, and Mars in exaltation. And then their feeling and values with the inner feminine, FI child, and moon in left field. And then last, they scan or perceive with the outer feminine, any inferior, and Jupiter in fall. So they carry, build, feel, and perceive. Capricorn first internalizes burden. So they internalize burden with inner masculine, SI hero, and Saturn ruler. This quadrant represents internal structure, consequence memory, and disciplined endurance, long-term reality calibration. Capricorn stabilizes through stored experience, repetition, and internalized duty. This is where pressure becomes identity and reliability becomes survival. Then Capricorn builds externally. They do this with the outer masculine, extroverted thinking, TE parent, and Mars in exaltation. This quadrant represents structural action, task enforcement, and long-term consequence management. External responsibility and execution, where reality is built, maintained, and carried. Functional adults, they are functional adults as children. They build systems, hold structures, and absorb pressure. They do what needs to be done. They carry what others drop. Then, much later, feeling begins to surface. This is with the inner feminine, FI child, and moon in left field. This quadrant represents private feeling, protected vulnerability, and quiet emotional truth, nervous system memory, and safety calibration, as well as lived consequence storage, where duty becomes embodied and pressure accumulates silently. Exhaustion, feeling surface after decades of holding weight, late grief. Capricorn feels more than they show, but emotion is often guarded, delayed, or expressed only in safe spaces. Care exists, but it is hidden under function. And only after that does wider possibility, perspective, uncertainty, or open-ended perception come into play. And that is with the outer feminine, any inferior, and Jupiter in fall. This quadrant represents uncertainty, future risk scanning, instability awareness, and worst case possibility loops, where burnout begins when uncertainty overwhelms structure, anxiety loops, imagining collapses because the body finally speaks from overexhaustion. This is why Capricorn is the highest structural moral load bearer. Capricorn carries consequence whether anyone sees it or not. Capricorn feels responsible before being asked. Capricorn experiences moral pressure through function, through continuity, through what happens if no one holds the structure together. So when Capricorn is delayed emotionally, that is not because nothing is there. It is because the structure came first. The function came first. The duty came first. Emotions get sequenced later. And that means the burden often accumulates silently for years before it ever gets language. Capricorn is not just masculine in motion, it is masculine in containment. And that is exactly why it sits at the top of the structural load-bearing hierarchy. So Capricorn begins with caring, taking on responsibility before processing feeling. All right, so now we are going to move on to Aquarius. Which I will be deep diving into hopefully within the next week or two. All right, so Aquarius begins with perception. Aquarius does not move first into the world physically. Aquarius first sees the system behind the world. It perceives patterns, trajectories, abstract structures, hidden architecture, future implications, and conceptual design. This is why Aquarius is perception dominant and structurally masculine in a colder, more architectural way rather than in a purely forceful or embodied way. So Aquarius's distortion order is inner feminine with perceive and I hero, Saturn, and Uranus. Then structure or define with their inner masculine, TE parent. And we have Neptune and Mercury in exaltation. All right, so then we have, I had to do an edit, sorry. Then we have value or detach with the outer feminine, FI child and Venus, and then engage late with the outer masculine, SE inferior, and Pluto. Okay. I have yet to super edit this one hardcore. I've got some typing. FI child and sun, for goodness sakes. I haven't edited this one yet, so I do apologize. Inner feminine and I hero, Saturn, Uranus, inner masculine, TE parents, Neptune, Mercury, outer feminine, FI child, sun, outer masculine, SE inferior, and Pluto. All right, so that is their distortion order. Perceive, structure, value, and then act. Aquarius first lives in pattern recognition. Then it becomes structuring those perceptions into frameworks, systems, categories, and models. Then it begins expressing values selectively outwardly. And only later do they direct only later does direct, embodied, immediate action fully come online. This is why Aquarius can rank high on the masculine and feminine axis overall. So they are actually number 3, I believe. I just want to double check because I always do so, especially when I'm exhausted, tired. All right, so yes, number 3, most masculine on my masculine to feminine overall ranking order. And then morally, they are number 11, actually, on my moral load. So they are very low. Moral load bearers. So this is why Aquarius can rank high on the masculine-feminine axis overall while still remaining low in moral load. Aquarius carries conceptual ethics. Aquarius carries ideals, and they carry systems. But Aquarius does not naturally carry moral burden in the body. It externalizes responsibility into structure, ideology, future design, or collective abstraction. Aquarius asks what the system is doing, what the pattern is, what the future implication is. It does not instinctively ask how to sit inside the human residue of collapse. So Aquarius is not low load because it lacks principles. It is low load because it distributes consequences into ideas rather than retaining it semantically or relationally. So Aquarius begins with perception, seeing patterns before acting. All right, always last, but not least, Pisces. All right, Pisces. All right, so Pisces begins with dissolution. Pisces does not begin with boundaries, structure, or even clear identity. Pisces begins with absorption, with merging, with entering the emotional symbolic field before clear separation has occurred. This is why Pisces is one of the most feminine archetypes overall. So they are my most feminine archetype overall in my ranking order. Its distortion order is inner feminine. So we have perceive or absorb with the inner feminine in Neptune, and Jupiter ruling. And then we have merge or regulate with our outer feminine, Fe parent, and Venus in exaltation. And then we have private understanding with inner masculine, T introverted thinking or Ti child, and Mercury in left field. And then we have embody and boundaries with outer masculine, SE inferior, and earth in fall. So they perceive, merge, understand, and then exit or embody or enforce boundaries. Pisces first perceives and absorbs, then it moves into external emotional regulation, relational attunement, compassion, and harmonizing. All right, so let me back up. So Pisces first begins with perception and absorption. So this is with the inner inner or internal. I'm getting so tired. Introverted intuition, G's, Neptune and Jupiter ruling. So this quadrant represents symbolic perception, collective absorption, boundary dissolution, and meaning immersion. Pisces does not meet the world through events, they meet it through meaning fields. So Pisces absorbs before separating. Empathy becomes automatic containment. Ni perceives trajectory, Neptune dissolves boundaries, and Jupiter expands belief and compassion. Pisces absorbs existence itself. Then they move into external emotional regulation, the relational attunement, compassion, and harmonizing. And this is with their outer feminine, extroverted feeling, or Fe parent, and Venus in exaltation. This quadrant represents emotional attunement, relational harmony regulation, and compassionate stabilization and harmony maintenance. Pisces organizes the emotional environment before organizing themselves. Love becomes regulation. Harmony becomes responsibility. Care replaces boundaries. So then, much later, private internal reasoning and understanding begin to form, and this is with their inner masculine quadrant, introverted thinking, Ti child, and Mercury in left field. This quadrant represents private logic formation, quiet meaning analysis, internal truth seeking. Pisces develops reasoning internally and late. Perception and empathy activated first. Logic develops privately. They question silently, analyzing internally. Rarely confront early. Truth stays internal. Philosophical self-organization. And finally, last, embodied action, clear boundary enforcement, or decisive exit occurs. This occurs with their outer masculine, extroverted sensing, SE inferior, and earth and fall. Embodied, so this quadrant represents embodied action, boundary enforcement, and physical reality engagement. So action comes last. Reality feels loud, conflict feels invasive, sensory overload or moral exhaustion forces action. Then withdrawal happens suddenly. So they can disappear, emotional shutdown, quiet exit, spiritual detachment, and evaporation. So they carry suffering, they absorb chaos, they understand everyone, they forget themselves, and they dissolve outward. Pisces carries high emotional load, but in a diffuse way. Pisces is not high moral load in the sharply retained structural sense of Capricorn or Scorpio. Pisces absorbs suffering, pain, atmosphere, and collective emotional pressure, but it struggles to hold consequence cleanly and enforce it clearly. So Pisces often carries enormous emotional residue without clean structural retention. It feels a lot, it absorbs a lot, it understands a lot, but action and boundary often arrive late, after overwhelm, after retreat, or after quiet disappearance. Pisces does not meet reality through containment. It meets reality through immersion. And that changes everything about how it breaks and how it heals. So Pisces begins with dissolution, merging before forming structure or boundaries. So I have done, I think, 2.5, 3 hours on Pisces already. Look for that in my Pisces playlist if you're interested. All right, so now I am going into my closing. What am I at? Hour and a half, not bad. I wasn't sure how long that was going to take. That is awesome. I kind of jumped ahead a little bit. I just wanted to get this video out. I got my key cards done. Super excited. Super awesome to see the visuals. I'm almost done with my moral load series. I'm almost done explaining each of the archetypes, the 12 archetypes, including moral load ranking, including nervous system breakdown through the inner and outer masculine and feminine. Very foundational. I am so excited. After this, I am going to go into personality dynamics, which is where everyone gets the most excited. I get the most excited about the structural, foundational, architectural stuff. Libras, they love the dynamics, relational dynamics. Anyways, I'm getting there after this, so it's exciting. All right. So when you see all of that together, the system stops being abstract. All right, so I'm going to leave an archetype up here. I think you got it pretty much, but I'm just going to leave this. It's nice to be able to see what I'm talking about. So I will make that a little bit smaller. We're not necessarily paying too close attention. It's just a visual. All right, so when you see all of that together, the system stops being abstract. It stops being a pile of categories. It stops being random observations about behavior, masculinity, femininity, trauma, morality, personality, astrology, or cognition. It becomes something you can actually use because now you can see where someone starts. You can see where their nervous system prioritizes first. You can see what they trust first. You can see what gets delayed. You can see what gets overused. You can see what becomes overdeveloped under pressure and what remains immature until much later. You can see where someone overcompensates. You can see where they remained trapped. And most importantly, you can see where they are likely to break under pressure. Not because they are bad, not because they are defective, and not because they are irrational, but because their system was built in a specific order. And once you understand that order, behavior stops being confusing. It stops feeling random. It stops feeling purely personal. It stops feeling like chaos. It becomes patterned. It becomes legible. It becomes structural. Because now, instead of asking why someone is acting that way in the abstract, you can ask what sequence are they following? What activated first? What are they defending? what they still have not reached, what is delayed, what is overcompensating for something else. And once you can see the sequence, you can begin anticipating the outcome before the whole cycle fully plays out. That is the shift. That is where this stops being merely interesting and starts becoming practical. Because this is not just about knowing archetypes as labels, it is about understanding how different human nervous systems organize themselves under pressure. It is about understanding why some people act first and feel later, why some freeze for years and then erupt, why some care until they collapse, why some people absorb everything and forget themselves, why some retain moral residue forever, and why others discharge it through action, meaning, identity, or abstraction. Different systems, different containment, different burden, different survival order. So now that the foundation is aligned, the next step is to finish the remaining archetypes in the Moral Load series. So Sagittarius, Aquarius, and Gemini, and bring them into the same level of clarity. And after that, the direction of this work shifts entirely. Because once the individual structures are clear enough, we move out of isolated archetypes into what happens when they meet each other, into interaction, into pressure between systems, into child and inferior function dynamics, into why certain pairings escalate instantly while others quietly decay, into why some pairings misunderstand each other at the level of moral retention, while others fracture around force direction, timing, attachment, or boundary sequence, into how completely different survival architectures collide inside relationships, conflict, family systems, attraction, intimacy, and emotional labor. Because this is where this becomes real. This is where this stops being theory and start showing up in lived life. This is where you stop just understanding people as isolated structures and start understanding what happens between them. And once you can see that, once you can see force, direction, moral retention, distortion order, and quadrant sequence operating together, reality itself becomes more readable. Not simpler, but more readable. And that is the point where the system finally begins doing what it was built to do. All right, y'all. I am beyond exhausted. And, anyways, I am freaking stoked. I cannot wait to rewatch this video. This was amazing. I am so happy. I cannot celebrate. I don't ever celebrate. Like, I literally write a 700-page book and then move on to writing a 200-page book and doing 300 more hours of video work. So I don't celebrate often. I don't get too excited. I can't. I'm Capricorn, ISTJ, stellium. 85% of my personality is Capricorn. So it's like on to the next huge task. Let's keep pressing forward. I hope you guys liked this video. Please remember to like and subscribe. I've finally met my 500 subscribers. I was so excited about that goal. And then I realized I need like 1,200 watch hours to get monetized. So I'm going to start making shorts. I think that is a great way to gain traction on watch time. People like shorts, they don't like hour-and-a-half video presentations. I understand that, so I need to start catering to both sets of people so that I can finally get my channel monetized. I'm ready to start memberships. I'm ready to start on to the next phase. Like, I'm ready. I've got it planned out. So anyways, hopefully you enjoyed this as much as I did. This was a lot of fun, although I'm exhausted. But anyways, feel free to leave your thoughts and feelings in the comment section below. This book should be done within a month. I'm going to give myself 2 weeks, but it's probably going to take a month. So in my head, I'm telling myself I'm going to get a 700-page book on every single archetype I just said here in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks. So should be done in about a month and a half with this project. And so, yeah, it's a huge one. Huge one. Anyways, y'all, take care.